Burned out, defeated, and desperate, the summer of 2011, episode 1 of 6. I'm Stephen Shomler, delighted you are here. Welcome to my new series covering 6.5 important chapters from my life change journey. The title of this series is Pursuing the Life My Heart Longed For. Now, if you want to know more about this series, I invite you to check out episode 0. Let's dive right into episode 1. So we're going to pick up the story. We're going to go back in time to the summer of 2011. Summer of 2011 finds me feeling completely defeated, burned out on the two main careers I'd had professionally up to that point in my journey. And I was just feeling desperate. I just didn't know. I just couldn't live the life I've been living anymore. I had to change my life. I was desperate for a new personal life and for a new professional life. Now, I mentioned my professional life. Up to that point in my journey, the two main careers I'd spent 10 plus years in the nonprofit world and 10 plus years in the banking world. And it wasn't just like clean 10 years here and 10 years there. It was a little bit messy. I spent some time in the banking world, then in the nonprofit world, then back into banking, then back into nonprofit for a hot minute. And as already mentioned, I was burned out on both of those careers. The idea of going back into either one just made me feel sick to my stomach. If you've burned out on a career and you just can't do anymore, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You just feel like there's just no way I can do it. My wife, when she was working on her journey, her first book is pretty amazing, Falling Out of Love with My Career. I encourage you to go check it out. You can go to getthepinkbook.com to check it out. But one point when she was writing the book, going back into full-time medicine, she said it made her feel like she was putting her head in a noose. And I knew exactly what that feeling was like, because that's how I felt summer of 2011 when I thought about going back into the nonprofit world full-time or back into banking full-time. So there was 3 big obstacles that I was wrestling with during this time. I already mentioned the first one, being burned out. The second one is a really big one. I call it my second great disaster. I'll explain that in a second. But the Great Recession hit us later than it did other people, hit my family later than it did other people. Some people hit right away in 2008 or 2009. By 2011, we were really wiped out by the Great Recession. I remember April of 2010, my April paycheck over my March paycheck was 10 times less. And then the paycheck after April, my paycheck was even worse than that. Just imagine if your paycheck dropped by 10 times, was 10 times less month over month. It was not pretty. And my wife at the time, the industry she was in, it was wiped out by the recession, and she'd been out of work for a year and a half. When you go a year, 2 years without any income, bad things start to happen. So as a consequence of all that, we were facing financial ruin and homelessness. And I have to tell you, for a long time, I carried a tremendous amount of shame. I felt so bad about it. It's like, I'd second guess myself, what could I do? What could I do different? But, just a lot of people are not in a situation where they're financially set up to go 2 years, a year and a half, 2 years without any income. But regardless, for a long time, I carried a tremendous amount of shame. And so I have a real heart for people. If you struggled with those kind of things, financial ruin, if you struggle with homelessness, trust me, you can battle back from that. You really, really can. And for me, financial ruin, homelessness, this situation, summer of 2011, it's what I call my second great disaster. Now, a great disaster is a personal experience that hits you so hard, it knocks you down so hard, you don't know if you'll ever be able to get back up again. It's something that knocks you down, hits you so hard, you're not sure you're going to survive. And I've been through 3 great disasters in my lifetime. They're a big part of my life change story. I'm working on a separate series that will cover each one of my 3 great disasters in detail, but some of you are probably wondering, well, what are the other 2 great disasters? My first great disaster was my childhood. I had a very, very dark childhood. I experienced every kind of abuse you can name, and probably kinds of abuse you can't imagine that you don't want to name. I'm so grateful I had a lot of really good therapy, years of really good therapy and counseling in my 20s that put me on a path to dealing with that trauma and begin a long-term journey of healing from that. If you've been through that kind of trauma, particularly as a child, I want you to know that you can heal from it. Like I said, if there's a type of abuse you can think of, I've experienced it. I've healed from it. If I can heal from mine, you can heal from yours. So, my first great disaster was my childhood. My second great disaster I dealt with in my life was this situation right now, summer of 2011. So much shame and sense of failure and worthlessness around it, financial ruin and homelessness. And we'll cover my third great disaster in a future episode in this series. So I mentioned 3 obstacles. We talked about financial and homelessness. That was a big one. Mentioned being burned out. That was not good at all, being burned out. And the third obstacle I was facing is I just could not stand the idea of having to start over. And it felt to me like whatever I did next professionally, I was going to have to start over. If I went back into banking, it would feel like starting over. Not that I wanted to do it, but that's how it felt. If I went back into the nonprofit world, it was starting over. I went into a different career altogether, for sure that was starting over. And part of the reason this was so painful to me is I felt like I'd done it so much in my life previously. And in the previous times I was younger and I had energy and it was like, okay, we're going from one thing to another. It's exciting and new. I left banking in Olympia, Washington in 2001 and moved to Minnesota, and that was literally starting over, switching careers entirely. And then in 2004 I left Minnesota for Portland, and that was starting over with a whole new endeavor. And then in 2007 I went back into banking, and that was starting over. And just the idea of having to do it again, it just wore me out, and I didn't know that I had it in me, and I didn't know what I would do. What career would I do next? What profession would I pursue? And what path would I take? And sometimes when I've talked to people, I've come to realize when I say financial ruin and homelessness, they think I mean metaphorically. So let me be really clear, I'm not talking metaphorically. We had a split level 5-bedroom home we rented in Portland around 148th and Division for a number of years. And when you go a couple of years without income, when you don't have money, eventually you just can't pay the rent. And it doesn't work to stay somewhere where you're not paying the rent. And we ended up moving the options we had before us. We tried to make the best situation we could, the best choices we could with the information we had at the time. And we ended up moving into the middle half of an unheated, unfinished 1-car garage. Now the kids, they got to go in a bedroom in the house, but there was no bedroom in the house for my wife and I at the time. So we moved into this garage. Now if you go to the very back of the garage, there was 2 big washers and dryers. They were big and they took up a lot of room. And then if you go to the front of the garage, there was this big, really tall, chest of auto mechanics tools. And at any hour of the day, a boyfriend would stop by and fling open the garage door, be it 7 in the morning on a Saturday or 6 o'clock in the evening on a Tuesday, and pull up a car and start working on it, kind of like a shade tree mechanic and fixing things up. And it was in that middle half, between that chest of drawers facing out and the washer and dryer, we had a bed and we had a rack on wheels with some of our clothes hanging on it, and we had stuff up on top that we had toiletries, a little shelf with toiletries and things on it, and then I had a little desk with my computer on it. And in the fall of 2011, that's where I did work to build my website, to build a new brand, to head off toward the life my heart longed for. I remember the fall of 2011, there was a cold snap in October. And I had some gloves and I cut the fingers off and I was typing and working on my website, and I just was laughing at the awfulness of the situation. I said to myself, well, someday I'm going to have an author event at Powell's. And I laughed at the ludicrousness of it. Here we are living in the middle half of an unheated, unfurnished garage. Yet, hey, I'm gonna have an author event at Powell's. But you know what? I actually believe, even though it was ludicrous and ridiculous, I actually believed that. And I have to tell you, I have so far had 2 authors events at Powell's, and I've got more coming. So we'll pick up more about what happened next with us living in that garage in the very next episode. But back to summer of 2011, the backdrop of all that heartache. I've got to start over. I'm burned out on careers. We're dealing with this awful financial ruin, homelessness situation. The question that was just haunting me and plaguing me is, what am I going to do professionally? What path will I take? And we'll cover this more in the next episode, but there was 4 things that inspired me for the path I eventually took. 2 books that I read, one in 2009, one in 2010, a life-changing meal I had the fall of 2010, and a TV show I absolutely loved. So we'll cover all of that. I'll give you all the details. Episode 2, the very next episode, it's titled Finding My Path to a Better Life for Me. I will see you there.